This episode, is your deck a ticking time bomb? Deck collapses are way more common than you might think. Most of the time, they're just not reported. They can cause injury and death. And so, in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about how to identify if your deck needs reinforcement. Thanks for listening to another edition of the Handyman Pros radio show, where our goal is to help save you time, money, and aggravation on your home maintenance and repair. This episode's entitled, Is Your Deck a Ticking Time Bomb? To help me explain, I'm here with my ever cheerful co-host and old buddy, Johnny. Johnny, your deck, by the way, if your deck collapses, guess what? Nothing happens because it's like 2 feet off the ground. Not even 2 feet off.
Well, if the, well, unless it's the portico, and then I'm in serious problem. Yeah. So, if any deck collapses, unless it's right on the ground, you got an issue.
You potentially have a very serious issue.
So I ran across, we were talking about this before the show. I ran across this article. And I thought it would be, with the season coming up here of, outdoor activities and, everybody hanging around outside, is that, we really need to pay attention to stuff like that.
Yeah.
Larry, you remember back in the 90s here in Atlanta, there was a neighborhood, and I used to drive by it all the time. It was a real nice neighborhood, and I think I've mentioned it before, but it seemed like all the decks there were collapsing. It was
they were high, if I remember right.
Oh yeah.
They were all high.
Yeah.
So.
And so it was a nasty scene. I know there's a lot of lawsuits going on at the time. The contractor that built these, or the contractor that built those decks. And then we that really did change the laws.
Change the code for sure.
Yeah,
they changed the deck codes. I can't remember when, but I think it's 2015, 2016. The deck code changed, and they became incredibly restrictive. I believe them to be incredibly restrictive, although I don't disagree with them because of poor construction habits. And folks, I can't remember, there's a website out there, but if you check deck collapses, it'll come up. But the number of deaths and serious injuries, when I say serious, I mean broken bones and things like that.
Death.
It's huge. Whoa,
You're absolutely right. I actually had I've got a good friend of mine that was at a party, and the deck collapsed.
Yep.
And it was, I'll spare you the details, but it was an awful scene, according to him. So, you have to be really careful of these things. Some of the older ones, are just not, well, let's talk about that.
Yeah,
what causes all this stuff.
Let's get into it. And so where do we want to start with this one, John?
Well, I think, you were right. A lot of these things, and for the folks out there, we talk about decks and repairs and things like that before, but a lot of this, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of it's not in the news.
No.
So, a lot of it's not reported. Some of the bigger tragedies are. And when you go and you look at like Google and stuff, there's a whole bunch of them out there. I mean, it's like, holy smokes. I mean, boy, some of these things, like there's one video out in this deck collapse out in Malibu that all these people are on this deck, and just the whole thing, they had the video of it, just the whole thing goes down, boom, with all these people on it, down to the rocks, So it was pretty nasty.
But let's get positive.
Let's get positive about that.
A lot of this stuff is very, very, how do we want to say it? It's avoidable. And let's just talk, I want to talk basic physics, right? Well, I guess maybe we should start, let's even back up for that. First off, how old is your deck, right?
Yes.
Kind of seems simple, right?
Yeah.
But if your deck is old meaning 10 years plus, might be time to do an inspection, right?
Yes. And so let me take, because of all the various things. One of the things that this article brought out that I was reading here is that, most of the decks that collapse are due to what's known as the ledger board.
Right. But not all.
But when you talk about inspections, that is probably the main failure point of these decks. And when I would looked out in Google and stuff, and sure enough, most of the decks came off. So Larry, what is the ledger board?
The ledger board is the board that attaches to the house itself. It's the long board or boards, I guess, that is flat against the house and should be properly either bolted or lag bolted in very heavily into the house itself. So it's what attaches the deck to the house.
Right. And many of those are not put in with flashing. They get water intrusion on them. The hardware starts to fail. The wood behind that ledger board, even that is a pressure treated board, if water gets in behind it, that board on the interior of your house rots away.
Right. And I was going to say the first thing on any deck to look for is any kind of wood rot, and that includes the boards, just your actual decking boards themselves. Now, I just redid my deck on my walkway that goes to my dock. I have a dock, and my boards were so bad that I mean, basically, you stepped on them, and we stepped on a couple of them, and they broke. And so I was like, now understand that was built in 2004. I have been paying attention to it, but the last couple weekends ago, I replaced the whole thing and painted the metal superstructure that's underneath it to do it, because nothing's happened to it since 2004. But look for rotten wood. Listen to the sounds too. If you're walking on it and you hear creaking and crackling, like it sounds like it's snapping, I can tell you from personal experience, it is.
Yeah, right. I have the same thing, and I'm sure a lot of people out there have experienced that. People will have you over at their parties or whatever. You got to be really careful. People don't take care of this. Now, let's get back to the ledger board for a minute, because that thing carries most of the load on a deck, or half the weight on the deck.
It usually carries half the weight
a lot of it. So that means all the wood on the top, all the furniture, all the people on the deck, that whole thing. And the more you load that thing up, and if it doesn't hold up, you have an issue.
Yeah, these are basically, I would call them a suspended floor, right, John? I mean, isn't that what you'd call a deck?
Exactly. And I will tell you that most of the other thing that this article brings out is that, when you have parties out there and people start dancing, you get this harmonic effect going on. And that really gets to be a hammer, right? More weight. And that's when these things really collapse. And you'll see, once again, when you investigate these things, most of them are from parties. Too many people on the deck.
Right. Too much, just basically too much weight. Too much motion.
Exactly.
Yeah, and too much motion. And folks, remember the motion when you're dancing. I know it seems, I don't want to get too physics on it, but it is both fore and aft and side to side and vertical. So it's in all three axes. It's up and down, it's left and right, and it's back and forth. And because just think about it, as you're dancing and you can watch me dance on the camera, folks, if you're watching on YouTube.
It's an ugly scene.
Thank you very much.
Well, go ahead, Larry.
But the point is that you're acting on all three axes of the deck itself, and that's, especially when you put a lot of people on it, that's a huge amount of force. It's just, John and I learn about all this stuff building model airplanes, right? Because you have the same thing. You're working three axes and you do all this stuff. But I know it seems like an oversimplification, but it's really not. And you have to be really, really careful when you put a lot of people on a deck. Actually, John, too, in the codes, decks are actually weight rated. So now nobody will ever tell you what it is, but there is a weight rating on your deck. The same thing as your floor in your house. The difference is your floor is supported usually on four sides, plus it has posts up in the middle. Usually, and so you don't worry about it so much, because the side to side motion and the fore and aft motion, meaning in the horizontal plane, are covered by your foundation, and so all that energy gets transferred out into your foundation. But remember, on a deck, you're suspended out there, so you're basically sitting on posts at one end and tied to the house on the other side. So that's just kind of the physics of it, right? If that makes sense. So is that a good explanation, John?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And people don't, a lot of folks, you have to be aware of this. And I have seen, some places that have had a lot of people on that deck.
Yeah.
And the first, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but when I go over to somebody's place, for a get together, and they're out on the deck, what is the first thing I do? I just look.
You do a head count.
I look underneath the deck. The first thing I look at, what's really rotten on some of these things are some of the stairs leading up to the deck.
Yeah,
are
that's
just
a good indication.
awful. and you look underneath there. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I look at the ledger board. I just do, it's just weird, And then because
I've been
on
people on the deck, right? So if you,
I do. Well, that's before I even
like,
get on the deck. I look at this thing. I'm like, yikes, yeah. And if you can't put your, arms out, without touching other people, you probably have too many people on the deck.
It's a good rule of thumb,
but
we're not trying to be party poopers. Trust me, John and I, we like to have fun. There's no doubt. We also want it to be safe. And the last thing, and if you, there are many videos out there of watching of deck collapses, and you got to understand, most of them are right in the middle of a great song and everybody's jamming along. And they're all having this great time. And the next thing you know, their world comes apart because it literally comes apart. And so that's one of the things. So, but anyway, back to our to the tips on this one, right? So, look at the ledger board, get up underneath there and actually look at it. And also, if you're at your own home, you can't do this when you're at somebody else. Well, you could, I suppose, but you don't want to. If you're at your own home, go to the backside, go up down in the basement if you can see it, if it's actually accessible, and take a look at that ledger board, or look at the actual edge of the foundation. Is the board that's part of your foundation, is it solid? Are the bolts coming through solid? The article brings up a really interesting thing, and I remembered this, but I forgot it at the same time, is that if you're using pressure-treated wood has a lot of copper in it. You'll get a galvanic action on your fasteners. So galvanic action is when steel actually changes chemical composition. It actually starts to eat away at the steel. When copper comes out, it doesn't mix well. And over time, it takes a long time, but it'll start eating away the fasteners. That's the reason why, if you're using pressure treated wood and you are walking down the fastener aisles, we've talked about this before, but we're going to just mention it real quick. You have to buy the right fasteners for pressure treated wood because they have a different chemical composition, or usually it's a coating on it. But anyway, be that as it may, it's designed to not corrode is what it's designed to do.
And if you're in a salt environment, even those fasteners have a hard time. So stainless, that's why it costs a lot of money. And you folks that live near salt water in on the coast and things like that, how caustic that stuff is on everything, it seems like. So you have to be super careful of that stuff. But you bring up a good point. Now, one of the decks that I just fixed is that they used all the wrong nails on the deck. So all the nails are being eaten away. On this deck.
Is there a surprise there, John?
No, there's not.
Too, isn't it?
There's not a surprise. Now, what is a surprise is this thing is, I'd say probably 30 feet off the ground, and just with a concrete patio below it.
Yeah.
And all of the railings are loose because all the nails are gone. So if you bump into one of those railings, like a little kid, you're overboard. So that was one of my
great point there, John. Checking, like, things to check, right? Go out, grab your rails and move them, or try to move them. Folks, they really shouldn't move, right, John?
No. And, one of the things that I did at this place, and they've got it's a real long deck, and I fixed a whole bunch of it temporarily to bring it back. But just walking past all the railings with like a, when you're a little kid walking by, a fence and just, hitting it with a stick or something, and you can hear all the loose ones. There's one, just walk by it. So I had to install a whole bunch of other stuff with screws, but my recommendation is, at some point very soon, is to replace that whole railing. Then I went back the other day, and she says, we got some loose boards on the deck. Same thing. Here come all the boards. They're warping, and they can warp because the nails just are gone.
Yep, they're gone.
And, you can trip over this. I'm like, wow, you can trip over this board that's sticking up, try to brace yourself on the railing as you're falling, and break right through the railing. This is...
the railing will stop your fall when you hit the ground.
Right. The ground will stop the fall. So...
the ground will stop the fall.
So, but anyways, funny, it is something to, as we approach here, of the, the season to be outside, is to really take a look at what your deck is, what's going on with it.
And take a look at it and just do these very simple things. And if you come and you actually go out there and you find all of this kind of information, it's time to either try to fix it yourself or get a professional in. And then, as we always say too, on the joists, right, John, you want to go in and you want to just, if you take up the boards, look for some rot on the joist. Now, it's not as common. Rot on the joist isn't as common as rot on the board, on the top boards. It's just not. But you do want to check the joists out too. And just on the outside edge, if there's some rot there, you might need to replace one or two. But in my experience, the joists don't ever seem to be nearly as bad as the thing. The other thing to check too is, does your deck actually have hangers on it, have the metal bracket hangers? And those can be installed after the fact as well. So like if a deck was built and they toe-nailed in the joists up to the ledger board, you can go back and you can attach the metal hangers. Now, I'm not trying to promote those things, but they do work really, really well. And they give you metal support up underneath, and they will actually draw that stuff, draw the joists back out to the ledger board a little bit. So it gives you an added layer of protection. Now I can't remember. They changed the code on that quite a long time ago. So unless your deck's really, really old, it'll have like probably a 1-inch piece of 1-inch square stock that runs down the edge of the board, and they put the joists up on top of that. But you can take and either knock that out and put in the metal hangers, or lots of times I've actually slid the metal hangers in between, actually tapped them in. They go between that 1-inch, then they go up against the ledger board and then screw them in, and then you're done. It really is very, very helpful. It's just it's a little bit of peace of mind when you're dealing, especially with a high deck. It's a piece of peace of mind.
That's a good tip. That's a good tip.
What else we got, Johnny? Anything?
No, that's it. Once again, just wanted to, I ran across this article and I thought, boy, of all the decks that I've seen lately, and the things going on, I thought we'd, bring this one out to the folks out there.
So I know you have your deck out there. Can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
When the spaceship lands, does it land on your deck? Is that where it lands?
Leaves burn marks on the deck. Yeah, but no, Larry. No, I know you're obsessed with these alien things. I don't know why. We're going to find out at some point.
At some point, we are. At some point,
find out,
you might find out. Allie might be in the background. You never know. You never know. All right, folks. If you like this insanity that we do here called the Handyman Pros Radio Show, please send some links and share this off with all your friends. We hope we're giving you good information. If you would like to contact us, please send us an email, questions@handymanprosradioshow.com or handymanprosradioshow@gmail.com. Join our Facebook group. Sign up for our newsletter. That happens at handymanprosradioshow.com. We send out good tips every once in a while and checklists and all that good groovy kind of stuff. With that, we will see you next week on the Handyman Pros Radio Show.